And we're back. Session three. Um, and yeah, feel free to camera on if you guys want. It definitely makes it more enjoyable for me to actually be able to see some faces and not just feel like I'm screaming into the void of a plastic or metal screen. Um, but yeah, Devin Alcoholic. Um, I'm really happy that we're meeting again. And I'm going to take a brief moment to welcome anybody who well, welcome everybody back who's been here, and anybody that's maybe not been here, welcome to those who are coming for the first time. And just a couple of, I guess I'll call it ground rules or considerations. I don't speak for AA. I'm just going to try to do my best to share out of my own experience. None of us ever speak for Alcoholics Anonymous. That's kind of the great beauty of it, is that we're all here. We're all one member. We all have one voice, and everybody's voice is important and carries just as much weight across the fellowship. Um, and so I have a decent chunk of experience serving in home group. My home group is called No Serenity Till Brooklyn out here. I've done everything from um, setting up chairs, taking things like making coffee, selling literature, passing the basket, to taking a 4-year term on our steering committee, and then taking a 2-year term during that 4-year period as the overall chair, and chairing a bunch of business meetings, chairing a bunch of committee meetings, and in general, being the point of contact for almost anything that the group has for 2 years. But outside of the home group, I've done service at our central office on the board level as a steering committee member, and then as actually a board officer, rotating on as a secretary to fill a vacancy. And I've done some service at my area and in my county, which is kind of like a super district. In New York City, we have counties because of how populated we are. So I've been, exposed to it and around things like area assemblies and committee meetings and all that kind of stuff at the central office intergroup level, as well as at the area level and at the home group level. And all those have been really rewarding experiences. And what I can share is when I got started with that kind of service, what I did was I went and sought out some past delegates and some people that had been sober a lot longer than me, that had a lot more experience with Alcoholics Anonymous, to go through these traditions and ultimately the 12 concepts for world service. And I found that as I served on committees and I was at my home group, being aware of these principles within the 12 traditions allowed me to just listen from a different vantage point than if I wasn't able to consider all these principles. And and then more recently, my current sponsor and I got together and we started talking about that, the reality of what we're dealing with here is principles, spiritual in nature. And the 12 traditions give us food for thought and a framework that we could really apply any relationship or group activity that we're involved in. Or we could apply them to any relationship or marriage, work teams that we might be on, friends in the fellowship, anything that we've got going on, we'll have an opportunity to really sit back and consider these principles and see them as guiding lights to better relationships with each other. And that's ultimately where they came from in the beginning. Um, and so we started 2 weeks ago, just giving a little bit of a history about where the traditions come from. And the reality of our first tradition is all about the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous. That uh, the most important thing for AA is that AA stays an organization, that we stay united, that we don't fracture and break ourselves apart and succumb to what so many things, other groups that kind of were barking up a similar tree. A bunch of groups failed. AA groups early on, but also other just whole movements. We'll talk about the Washingtonians when we get deeper into this thing. And the Washingtonians was a group that came in the temperance movement of the United States, which is like the 1800s, in the middle 1800s, and there was this whole movement about everybody, swearing off alcohol and any of that kind of stuff. And that was a big deal. And they blew up and had like 500,000 people in the 1800s, which is like percentage wise of the total population over here, a massive number. And then they got divided by starting to get involved into politics and arguing with each other. And within 4 years, that group disbanded to the point where only nerdy people in Alcoholics Anonymous in today's world even know who the Washingtonians are. And the only reason we know about it was because in the 1940s, less than 100 years after this whole thing happened, an early AA member had wrote to Bill Wilson that his observation of the fracturing that was going on within Alcoholics Anonymous in its first 10 or so years, when things were starting to grow and it was a little rocky, his observation was, it looks like what's going on here is what happened to the Washingtonians. And Bill's response was, who are the Washingtonians? So it shows that like this movement came up, had a massive impact for a couple of years, and then just went away. And so the what became the underpinning of all these traditions and what Bill was really looking for as a means to was to figure out how we can stay united and how we can start to put our faith into the understanding that like this program was a gift that we got from the divine. This program that came to us and the way that it's been put together is really a big piece of grace for alcoholics. That in the history of mankind, we have never had a resource like this available to those who have alcoholism. And I would offer, this is my own opinion, but from my observations as an AA member and as a person who's been on this planet for a couple of decades now, medicine and science hasn't figured out a cure yet. We don't have a pill that you can come in as an alcoholic and take a treatment and you will be able to drink like a regular person. That doesn't exist. So alcoholism is a chronic condition that we need to treat. And thank God this 12-step program has given us a real vehicle to be able to treat the underlying condition that we have, which is extreme selfishness and self-centeredness that pushes my mind to obsess about alcohol, and couple that with a body that has a funny reaction where I need more alcohol when I start drinking. And I've got this really bad diagnosis that for most people that get that diagnosis, it is terminal. It's like stage 4 cancer. We don't have anything to do for you. And the fact that AA exists gives us some hope in that darkness. And so all these traditions are based on, we got to stay united. And we have to see, hopefully we can understand that the most important thing for all of us is that we stay together, that there is no us and them, that we got unity. And that's not to say that we're not important as individuals. But the idea here is as we go into these deeper, like we go farther down the traditions, we're going to see that the reasoning or the consideration amongst all these traditions is ultimately about how would this potentially fracture us so that we would potentially, all the groups would kind of blow up and then we would not be able to come together and have the community and the fellowship, which seems to be another vital piece to how this all works. And we wouldn't be there for new people. I was able to go on a website and search AA in Brooklyn, New York, and find a website that had all these meetings listed. And I was able to show up at these random locations and random times. And there was people there making coffee with cookies, welcoming me in, had books for sale, had pamphlets, all that kind of stuff. I just was the recipient of. And so we started to get into, all right, so if I'm a group and we got to stay united, then who makes the decisions? Clearly there's got to be a leader. And we kind of look at our second tradition, which says, no, there's no leaders in AA, there's trusted servants. That if you stand up and you take a position of, like Karthik decided, we had a phone call, and he said, I think we should look at these traditions. And then it was like a quick discussion about maybe we invite some more people and we get some people together. Karthik is not the leader of this workshop. He was the person who had the initial idea. And then as you guys started to join the workshop, we were able to have a conversation with everybody and then hash out like a little bit of how we wanted it to run. And so the second tradition lays out the idea that we have people that are trusted servants, and that's a position of humility. I will make myself available. I will take that job. I will do this thing that needs to be done in order to help others. but I'm not the one who I'm not discharging authority at that point. What I'm doing is I'm trying to serve, hopefully, with the spirit of humility and the spirit of service. And then when we start to grow and we get more people, we start to realize that what's important is to make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody feels like they get heard. That we don't have this hierarchy of leadership where one person just says, this is what we do, and that's what happens. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons that they talk about in here. Number one, that can be dangerous for the person that thinks that they have the answer. The group elders, the leaders, the people that know better, right? We can get sick as alcoholics thinking we know better. I've been struggling with this at my own home group now. I'm one of the longest standing members of that group. A lot of the people that were there in the first couple of years, they've moved. Their lives have changed. They've got families. Their schedules are different. So the founder and a bunch of the early meeting goers at my home group and members are no longer there. There's one lady who's been there a little bit before me, and she left for a little bit. Now she's back. And then there's myself. I've been there over like 10 and a half years now. And outside of that, everybody else is more, newer member, or I've watched people get sober. There's a lady with 8 years now and a kid, and I watched her count days 8 years ago, so that's super cool. But so what I'll struggle with is I know better. Someone who just joined the group 3 months ago has an idea for some change at the group. And I'm like, man, we talked about this 5 years ago. We talked about this 8 years ago. Let me tell, but they don't care. They're like, yeah, well, we're going to talk about it now. Who are you? You're just a member, and so that's I think that's a useful thing for me is that I realize that like I'm just a group member, and my role isn't about getting authority and power. My role is about being a trusted servant. And if I think that I am the authority and that God is not the authority, then I can get sick behind that. And we talked about the difference between the bleeding deacon or an elder statesman. And the bleeding deacon, the Bill describes, as the longtime sober person or the leader of a group, the elder of a group, that starts to think that without them leading everything and taking care of everything, the group's going to fall apart. And then they talk about the elder statesman, who is the person that starts to be able to take a step back and allow the group to be the group, and then kind of waits to be consulted and might raise their hand, and they might share when they really feel like, hey, I got to say something, but also is going to sit back and allow the group to have a discussion without always trying to influence it. And I think that's what we mean by there's leaders. The leaders that we have are trusted servants. It's not an authority and a power thing. But when we start to have experience, we have a lot to offer if we've been here for a while. But we also then have a responsibility to sit back and allow the group to be the group. And then the big thing is we all get to share, and we all get to vote, and we all get to come to the realization that God speaks through all of us, not through one of us. And so for my money, that's the beauty of the second tradition. As long as everybody's aware of what we're talking about and everybody has a voice and everybody's heard and listened to, hopefully that's us promoting God showing up. And it says that a loving God is expressed in our group conscience. And so my job then is I might have had a great idea and the group might think it's a bad idea. But my job would be if I'm going to accept, I can't accept some of this, but not all of it. So if I have to accept that I'm here to live on spiritual principles, the principle within step 2 is that even if my idea gets voted down and everybody heard it and they listened to me, then my job is to accept the group conscience and not fight and constantly be telling everybody they're wrong, because that would kind of be, I think, more what the bleeding deacon's doing. We had someone had written something in the chat, and Karthik raised his hand. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so this is about the question in chat. So maybe you can share your experience. And I also have a question after that. So this is an important point that Anil is raising. So I just wanted to address that, and related to that only, I have a question.
I say that last part again. I think I couldn't hear you for everything.
So let's address what Anil is saying in the chat, maybe your experience in that. And
Okay.
After that, I'll ask the question.
Sure. So what was written in the chat is, there are leaders in AA They are trusted servants. They're not. They don't govern. And so, yeah, I may have misspoken or not conveyed what I meant by there's no leaders or there's no like governance. Like we don't have a president or a CEO or somebody that can say this is what you have to do and come in and govern other meetings or make a decision from up on high in some kind of like role of authority. But we absolutely have leaders within AA, and the leaders within AA are the people that are um, that are stepping up, that are taking the service positions, that are making themselves available, that are able to have some clarity when they speak about our program, that are able to have some clarity about our history. That, to me, being a leader in AA, Bill has an essay on the ninth concept. And if you look up concept 9 in the service manual, it was in the grapevine, and you can see, you can just read the essay in there. But what he talks about is that a good leader is someone who has vision, is someone who sees the wisdom in the group and will pick and choose their quote unquote battles. Somebody that's not always out there trying to get their way, but will sit back and actually allow the group to speak, and then will add input when they can. But he also says that a good leader will also know when to dig in their heels. And a good leader would be the person that's willing to stand up on principles, even though they might be the most despised person in that moment. And so he kind of has this essay that would really talks about the qualities as he believes are good leaders in AA. And we definitely need people that are willing to step up and that are willing to be those leaders. And in a home group setting, that's the person that says, I'm going to be at the business meeting. I'm going to take that position. I'm going to help as a chair. In your local districts, you probably have public information committees and cooperating with professional communities and corrections and treatment and literature. There's all sorts of committees that AA members are needed to fill out for them to be effective. And so those are the people, in my opinion, that become the leaders of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the people that start getting that experience of a bunch of different types of service. And number one for me, a good leader within AA is somebody who's first and foremost living the 12 steps as a blueprint for life. That you're working with a sponsor and you're also sponsoring other people. You're trying to involve prayer, meditation, and develop a real relationship with the God of your understanding. And you're using inventory and self-examination on a regular basis so that you have a working and active, fluid experience with the recovery program. And if you have that with a working knowledge of these traditions, you will instantly be somebody who is a leader within your community. But being a leader there doesn't mean you could tell people what to do. It just means that, hopefully we lead by example, and over here you'll see people say, don't listen to what I say, but watch my feet. If you want to see, if you're looking for somebody and you want to find out if they have something you want, don't listen to what they say. Look at how they live. Look at how somebody's actually carrying themselves. 5-10 minutes out of the meeting, if that guy's peeling out, burning rubber, almost getting in a car accident, hitting somebody, driving out of the parking lot of the meeting, it's kind of like interesting. He's flipping people off. You're hearing horns honking. You're like, is that Bob from the meeting? Mr. Spiritual over there? You know, um, but like, I've run into people in different situations, and you see that there's people that are actually exuding love and service and how they talk to people and how they respect people. And that's not just in AA, it's you see them in the world and you go, that's actually how they are. Um, I think that's what the hallmark of a true leader is that this stuff is put into practice in our lives. And it makes us more useful. So Karthik, and then we have a written in the chat question, and then we'll start getting
Yes.
into the third tradition.
Yeah. So last week we spoke about uh, trusted servants, right? So you said they take their decision by their group conscience. But I also heard, if at all, I am not a trusted servant. I usually like to go back to the group and ask for group conscience. Because if it's a simple matter, I will take it. But if I'm in any way uh, uh, So if I'm anyway in doubt or if it involves money, I usually go back to my group and take group classes. So any thoughts on that? Even though I'm given the authority as per the concepts. So for my own personal recovery, I think I need to go back and get a group classes. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And what Karthik I think is kind of laying out is the line between group conscience um and right of decision. And so in the 12 concepts, there's three rights that are given to all of the trusted servants. And the first one comes in concept three. It's concept three, four, and five. And concept three is called a traditional right of decision. Four is the right of participation, and five is the right of minority or of appeal or minority opinion. Um, but with the right of decision, what we're effectively saying is if you are a trusted servant and we've given you, you've stood for service and you were elected, then we want to give you an ability, an amount of authority to discharge the responsibilities of that position without always having to come back to us. We don't want to micromanage that person doing that service. We trust you to go and serve. So you're going to do hospitality. We can give you X amount of money every week. If you come back with receipts, the group can give you this much. You buy whatever you want is hospitality. Now, for somebody, that's going to be cookies and coffee, but somebody might say, hey, I want like tea and fresh fruit. And it's like if we've elected you to be the hospitality person and bring some stuff for the meeting and you're within your budget, like do whatever you want. Now, what Karthik is asking is, in certain matters, where would I make the choice to, where would I make the choice um, to make a decision in the moment versus go back to the group? And I think for me, there's a few things of consideration. Number one, the main piece of right of decision would be ultimately we're extending that to our trusted servants going down to like the delegates in the conference. And the reality is if there's discussions happening in this 1 week conference and they're having to make decisions about what's going to happen within AA moving forward, our delegates aren't able to come back to our areas and say, hey, this was actually the new information we got. What do you guys think? So they have to make decisions because there's a time window that that's all happening in. And so if you're at an assembly, for instance, or you're at a committee meeting and there's a time sensitive, unfortunately, we have to vote on this now, then there's no real way that I could bring that back um, to my group. But if it's something that's going to impact the group, perhaps, and it's something that isn't an emergency, bringing it back to the group for a group conscience, I think is wonderful. But I think part of the trusted servants thing is if you're in a position where you're getting information and you're participating in a service entity outside of the home group, but the home group has elected you to be the representative, part of that I would say is the group has delegated that authority to that individual, so that the whoever it is, if you're being a general service representative or a central office representative or delegate, the words are somewhat different. But if you're there and it's and the group says, hey, you go do it, we trust you, go do it, then you have every right to make those decisions. But if you don't have a timeline and you have the intuition that like I think I should bring this back to my group, I think that is the hallmark of a good leader too. And part of it would just be in your own experience taking an opportunity to sit with that and kind of search your intuition. Is this something I need to make a decision right now, or is this something that we can um, we can take a moment, take a breath, and I can go back to my group. And I think that's kind of the line that it's kind of like if you've ever been a secretary of a group and you're there taking the minutes for the business meeting. What we would always say is the minutes are in the eye of the beholder, like the secretary. So however the secretary writes those minutes out, um, is what's going to be on the record. But it's kind of like each secretary might do that a little different. So I don't know if that's answering that question as much, but I think it's really about, if there's a time that we don't have to decide right now, why not go to my group and get a feeling from my group if I can do that? But sometimes I may not be able to do that. And as a trusted servant, that's part of the what we're offering is that you can make those decisions in those moments when it's a time sensitive thing. Um, Really quick. So I know we are traditions, but I was reading this question really quick that Pradeep put in. Um, I'll say really quick because it's an AA meeting, and if we're asking something about step one, I feel like I can't say nothing about step one. But what I would offer is the question is about what kind of a state of mind a person might have before they relapse, and I would say, a great a great piece of insight is the chapter more about alcoholism in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. In that chapter, that whole thing is a bunch of stories that talk about the mental state that precedes the first drink. And it's everything from the kind of anger and resentment that somebody might have towards authority and towards people in their lives to somebody having gleeful celebration of a good job and their work being done to people having no thought whatsoever and just having the obsession to drink take over. And I think that my experience of what preceded me taking a drink at the end was I had no thought. I woke up for months and wanted to get sober and found myself drinking. And that to me was what they talk about as the peculiar mental twist or the blank spot. And to me, that's the scariest part of my alcoholism is that at some point I'm not even making a conscious choice anymore. I'm just drinking and I'm drinking against my will. And I know that alcohol is not an answer and I know it's not going to help. And above all, I've been going to AA meetings wanting to get sober and I couldn't stop. And, so for me, that was really the hallmark of the mental obsession of alcoholism is I can't stop, even when I want to. And I've heard some people say that, yeah, I just quit drinking. And my experience was every time I quit drinking, I started drinking again. And the beginning for me only came when I realized that that was my truth. The best I can do is I take a drink, no matter what's going on. It could be a horrible day, a great day, a bored day, but at some point I take a drink. And the only thing that changed that was the day that I came into a meeting and I said, I'm effed and I don't know what to do. But if I'm not surrounded by you people or another one of these meetings, I'm going to be drunk and high later. It's going to happen. And that was August 28th of 2011. That was the day I really joined AA. And that was the beginning of what I didn't realize was going to be this journey of recovery, which for 14 some years now, I've been sober. So I found that, I had to be super broken. When I was broken enough, it seemed like I was able to have a little bit of my heart open up and I was able to get a little nudge from spirit in my heart. And I happened to be around some sober alcoholics and this grace kind of started to open me up. And as I've sought more power and continued to seek a real relationship with the God of my understanding, I've been put in this position where I'm no longer sitting here craving or thinking about alcohol. I mean, I was in a black tie gala last night with an open bar and free whatever, and people are walking around, do you want the white or the red? And I'm like, I'll just take the water. I don't even think about it anymore. I go and I see the bar and I'm like, oh yeah, people drink, that's right, that's a thing. And for someone that woke up and drank the clock round for years, it's astonishing to me. But for the meeting that we're here now, one of the reasons why we're talking about the traditions is because I want everybody to be able to have access to that. That I could show up as this lost, completely broken person, and I could find people that had experience with alcoholism and experience with recovery to be able to show me a way out. And to me, that's what that's where these traditions are all about, is we got to figure out how to stay united. So I'm going to read a couple of things. I'm going to pull the stuff up from, I shared it in the group, but one of the things that we didn't talk about was some of the questions about group conscience in our homes. And so again, the sheets that I'm sharing and some of these questions, they come from a member. So it's not like official AA literature. But I find this is a food for thought. I find it really useful in my daily life. And so what Mike wrote was for our family or relationship purpose, there is but one authority, a loving God as he expresses himself in our informed family conscience. Each partner is God's trusted servant, neither governs. And so he lays some of that stuff out. But some of the questions that were food for thought, when one partner speaks for his relationship without consulting the other member or members involved, is this trying to control or run the relationship and its activities? Is this really healthy? How is an informed family or relationship conscience taken? Why is it necessary that a healthy relationship be one in which the members are equal? So, what Mike is asking in these questions, in my opinion, are talking about is how do we level the playing field and understand that maybe there doesn't need to be a power dynamic within our friendship or within our marriage or within our relationship at work with our equals. Obviously, if you're a manager at work, there is a power dynamic there. You manage somebody, so you have to take on a role of leadership and authority because that's your job. But at home, is it possible that I could start to try to level that playing field out and offer that kind of grace to my partner that, hey, you're an equal partner here. So you have a voice. Now, there's obviously going to be cultural things that might be slightly different, right? And so I'm speaking again, not for AA, not for anything, just out of my experience. But at home, like that's what my wife and I, well, it's what I try to do with my wife. I try to go to my wife and I ask her if we have a weekend together, what are your ambitions for this weekend? What are you hoping to get done? Is there anything that you wanted to get done this weekend? And we have some time, so let's plan it. Let's do it together rather than me coming and saying, here's what I'm doing and laying the law down, because that happens enough with my work life. My work schedule is very much out of my control. As like a freelance, independent, small business owner, I am not able to have all the agency to just make decisions there. So sometimes that will influence our time that we have together. But am I willing to stop and run decisions by my family? If we have kids, am I willing to get the kids involved in the discussion of what might impact their lives? What food do you guys want tonight? Have whatever it is. Now, obviously, you can't let your 3-year-old decide what you're eating for lunch or breakfast all the time because they're going to pick garbage, right? So you have to be a parent. You have to be the adult. But it's like, hey, maybe we can get involved and like bring everybody together. Um, why is it necessary to give the minority opinion an open-minded evaluation and a family conscience? I think we talked about the minority opinion a bit and the idea that we need to hear people out. And so if in my home, if I'm basically making decisions and there's a minority opinion against my decisions, am I really hearing that out with an open mind? Or am I just kind of, okay, yeah, well, you want, well, that's fine that you think that way. We're not doing it. And if I'm coming to the family or the marriage or the relationship with this kind of heavy-handed authoritarian type deal, then we might end up in a lot of conflict at home. So there's more, and you guys can read through the rest of those. And then Karan has a question, and I want to start looking at our third tradition.
Yeah, yeah, Devin. So the thing with the family, what I observed very recently is uh, until the time I got to AA, I led a very selfish and very self-centered life. So even it affected my relationships in such a way that, for example, what meal I want to have for dinner at home, my family makes it a meal what I would like to eat. Because if they don't make a meal which I don't like to eat, I would order out and I would abandon the dinner for the family. So that's how I've had a relationship with them. But with AA, when I try to say that, okay, what do you guys want to have for dinner? Okay, what do you guys want to do? Once I started practicing this, they are unable to grow out from that uh, fear where they made me the universe, right? Uh, you know, so how do we bring group conscience to that? because they're not willing to go out from it. They want everything to be my decision, what I like and what I don't like. Sometimes it's like a bit taxing to say I'm okay with anything. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love all of that. I love the this is how it used to be and this is what I'm trying to do. And then I think what we're butting up against though is some of the ideas where we talk about it within, the family afterward or two wives where it's like, hey, we like conditioned people around us. Like our alcoholism legitimately is conditioned people in our families to look at us a certain way or treat us a certain way or react a certain way. Like we made them neurotic. We made them, we break people, and that's why there's an entire program for family members of alcoholics because alcoholism infects them too. And what I think at the end of the day, I think some of it is, you know, is it just takes time. People need to see the live demonstration that I'm changing and I need to try to show up differently long enough that people typically my experience with family members is the immediate attitude may change. In the shorter term, people start to open up a little, but there is that thing that they're holding on to where they're waiting for it to blow up again. It's like the traumatic nature of us constantly letting people down and hurting people is like it takes a while for that last 2 or 3% of the wound to finally heal. And my mom told me it was somewhere around 5 years sober where they got a phone call late at night on the landline. This is cell phones. This is like 9 years ago or something. Like everyone's got a cell phone, but they still had a landline at home, corded into the wall, and that rang at like 9:30 at night. And the experience that my family has always had of the landline ringing late at night was it was a hospital or it was a police agency or it was some kind of trouble with me. Because that's when that phone would ring. The landline would ring because, that was the number that would be, found in a phone directory or wherever. So police, detectives, hospitals, whatever, they were getting those phone calls late at night. And my mom told me it was somewhere around 5 years sober that the landline rang and she didn't get that sinking pit of her stomach feeling that something was wrong with me. That the phone rang and she went, that's odd. Let me go see who that is. And so it took her, 5 years before she was able to heal from all that. And then one of my heroes, Don, it took 20 years for his younger brother to say, hey, maybe we should go have a chat and look at really making, an amends here. So the healing time that it takes for family members is going to range in all kinds of ways. And people need some time. But I think the biggest thing is we just kind of continue. And if it's like I need to make a decision, I make a decision. But maybe there's a way to communicate and get ahead of that. Like, hey, I know next weekend we're going to have some time. Is there anything that can I go to the store and pick some stuff up? Is there some food that you'd want to make? Or even just make a suggestion. I know that I haven't really liked this food, but I know they really like it. So, hey, I want to have that tonight. And it's like maybe I try to be proactive and make decisions that might be for everybody. And we'll go. Is that? I think that. I mean, I'm not sure I'm answering questions, but that might be some thoughts I have on that. Hand up for Karthik, but also just for our friend Pradeep. Yeah, I would say that most of the people on this call, you can definitely reach out to as far as sponsorship goes. So I think some people have already started putting numbers in the chat, and we'll continue. And but yeah, there's a lot of people here that can really help you out, brother. All right, Karthik.
Yeah. So it was interesting for you to say that, people and relationships are equal, because there is some kind of message here saying that, your wife gets two votes and you get one vote. Uh, so, your wife is the higher power at home, kind of messages. So, any thoughts on that? You're on
I
mute,
was,
Devin.
is it in the thing that we set, or is this just what I was talking about last time?
No, no. Message in Hyderabad. They say that your wife is your higher power. He gets two votes. Or
Oh,
yeah.
well, that might be more just a smart practice. And the old saying of a happy wife is a happy life. But I mean, and I think that the reality is this, like, what am I fighting for? Like if I'm at home, you know, what am I fighting for? What I want my home to be is a place of serenity and I want it to be, a place of solitude and a place of peace. Like I want to be able to walk into my home and be at peace with the world. And I look at my marriage as more, rather of what is my wife bringing to my life is what can I bring to hers. And I found that if my partner feels supported and my partner is having a good experience, that comes back to me in all these other ways that I would never be able to see. But I do believe that there is a level, like, I'm sponsoring a guy, and it seems like right now there's just a disparity of what he's been trying to do and feels like he's doing a lot for the family. And then, his partner doesn't see it that way. Um, And so there is a moment where it's like, hey, this isn't about like letting somebody walk all over me. And we need to be hopefully rooted in the truth of what's actually going on. But sometimes that can be difficult. And sometimes, with a relationship, if both parties aren't committed to a spiritual way of living, you may need, I don't know if there's therapists and stuff out there, but over here, like couples will go to therapy together to have a third person to help them be able to communicate better. It's ultimately what I think a couples therapist is really about, just having a third party there that can help two people that have some frustrations be able to communicate more clearly. And to me, that's what these traditions are hopefully laying the foundation for at home, is that I can be a better communicator and that I can be I can better express myself and not be someone who's getting resentful and afraid. And, the steps help with that, but then also being mindful of this stuff helps with it. I mean, if you feel like giving the wife an extra vote, though, I mean, then if it's a party of two, then you're always in the minority no matter what. She's got 66.7 and you got 33.3. You're toast every vote, man. Uh, but to me, I think the most important though is, are we talking to each other? Am I communicating where I'm at? Do we have open communication in the relationship? Is there love and respect in this relationship? And do I have an active interest in really wanting to listen to my partner and hear where they're at and see if I can bring the spirit of love and service into my marriage and into my relationships with all people? Mike hit me between the nose when we were talking about the eighth tradition and non-professionalism. And I said, Mike, how does non-professionalism and this whole idea that we're not professionals in AA be applied to my own personal life? I've been looking at it. I can't think of anything. And he said, well, the subtext of that is we do AA for fun and for free, right? And I said, yeah, this is for fun and for free. And he goes, do you give your love and your kindness away for fun and for free? Or do you put a price tag on that? I saw Karan's eyebrows. Like, that's exactly it was like, oh my God. I walk through the world and I put conditions on who I love. And I don't do it consciously, but it just happens. And that really got me to start thinking about, is that happening at home? Am I willing to be kind to my partner only if all these conditions are met? Or am I willing to just show up regardless of what's going on and try to just be loving and kind and supportive? And the reality is, if I go back to my inventory and I go to that conduct relationship part of the inventory and I look at the ideal that I was asked to put together of the kind of husband or partner that I would like to try to be and embody in a relationship all of those principles that I just said about being loving, kind, supportive, all that stuff's baked right into how I want to be. But sometimes through the everyday living and the monotony of everyday living, I start to forget some of those things. And I found that after being in a relationship for 12 plus years, unconsciously, I have a mind that would start taking that for granted. If I'm not actively aware of that, then that could really go to this crazy place where then I become the authority and not the trusted servant in the relationship. I become the active singular there is no group conscience, there is no unity, and I become the power driver. And to me, that's really important to watch out for, and to start to say, hey, this is a gift. I'm not owed a relationship here. I'm not owed anything here. But it seems that God saw fit for me to be able to be in relationship with one of his kids. So maybe I should try to really bring these principles that I've been learning about here to that relationship. And if that's happening, then I get to watch how I can hopefully brighten somebody else's life. And being able to be a part of watching somebody else have an amazing experience because we're working on this thing together has then given me a reward that I didn't know I was looking for. Because I couldn't get into relationships with people that were not super selfish. But so yeah, I think group conscience super important. I think just good communication and talking and really hearing people is ultimately, in a group setting for AA, that's really important. Let's hear from everybody. The best ideas ultimately tend to be workshopped through more of us, and we come to a better idea than maybe the initial idea. And maybe that's true at home. And and so we get into our third tradition, which is one of my favorites. The short form says the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Pretty clear. If you have a desire to not drink alcohol anymore, you can claim membership here. And what this was about was not kicking anybody to the curb, making sure that we're open and available to everybody. Now, the long form has a little bit more to it. The long form says our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. So I'll give a little bit of a history of this and a little bit of my own experience with this. First of all, why did we have to have a tradition around membership rules? I mean, isn't everybody just, you come to AA and you're a member, right? You say you're a member when you are. Well, when we were falling apart, I was talking about that period about 10 years into AA's history in the mid 40s. 1940s, 45, I think, is when Bill first started authoring and publishing at the end of 1945, maybe the end of 1946. But somewhere in that, you could look it up and just find out when these 12 traditions started showing up in the grapevine. It might be December 1946. But it was in that period where we started to find out that groups weren't surviving, that groups were forming in other parts of the country, and they weren't lasting. And so one of the questions that Bill had posed when he was trying to poll the AA membership at the time was, does your group have any membership requirements? And if so, what are they? They got all this correspondence from all these different groups in Florida and, Kansas and, all over the country over here. And when they compiled the master list of all the requirements that were included by all these groups, Bill and Dr. Bob would have not qualified to be members of the program and the fellowship that they ultimately were a part of starting. So it became clear that what we needed to make sure that everybody understood that the only thing that we're here to do and the only requirement to be here is alcoholism. That's it. If you want to stop drinking and you can't stop drinking, you are welcome in AA. And one of the things that he writes is, who among us wishes to be judge, jury, and executioner of his fellow man? That who am I to say you don't belong here? What kind of hubris is that for me to deny you an opportunity to come and recover? Now, in the essay, they talk about this guy, Ed. I think it's Ed, right? The angry atheist Ed. The thing about Ed was he didn't believe in God, and he would get really loud in the meetings and say this whole God thing is a bunch of BS, and he kind of was angering, making everybody in the group that he was that angry. And they wanted to kick Ed out because they said, Ed, this is really counterproductive to what we're doing here. You come in here and yell about how there's no God and this whole thing's so stupid. And so he kind of threw it back on the members. He said, you guys said that, the only thing that is, the only thing required here is just a desire to stop drinking. Is that true or not? Or do I have to believe in your God? And he's basically challenging them on this openness of membership, and they had to concede the point. And so I want to read through the long form and what I'll tell you is this. I was 18. My only experience with institutionalized treatment was when I was 18 years old. And I got put in a treatment facility, and AA was doing AA stuff. What I mean by AA was doing AA stuff is a couple of nights a week, there was members of Alcoholics Anonymous that knocked on the door and were let in to sit with us kids that were in this rehab and bring AA meetings to us. So my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous was through service. It was through members of Alcoholics Anonymous making it their business to come and bring us a message of recovery. And I was told in this facility when I was stepped out of the inpatient to the outpatient part that, you had to go to AA meetings, you should have a sponsor and do steps, right? And so I did all that because I saw that the only way I was going to get any kind of freedom again was if I followed the directions. And so they told me to do all these things. And so I did those things so that I could get to go to this school in another state and get back to the life that I thought I was supposed to live. I went to AA. I went to a ton of AA meetings, had a sponsor, supposedly wrote an inventory. I don't remember any of it, right? I had zero recollection. But I did what I was told to do. But underneath it, I did not have a desire to get sober. So actually, I went to a bunch of AA meetings. I couldn't even claim membership, really. If I look back on it, I didn't have a desire to get sober. I did not have a desire not to drink. What I had a desire for and why I came to AA was for people to leave me alone so that ultimately I could go back and drink. And so I think that's just a consideration for all of us as members. Am I in AA actually wanting to be sober for good and for all? Like, have I actually made a decision here that I'm going to live this program and live this way of life, hopefully to the day I die? That I really want to be sober the rest of my life because I can see the pain of active alcoholism and the reality that if I keep drinking, I will either take my own life or die on, this slow death of alcoholic death. And so that's an important thing. Do I actually want to get sober? Do I actually want to not drink ever again? Now I'm gonna give just a couple of different perspectives on this tradition. I'm not claiming this is how I feel, but I want to share a couple of the ways that this third tradition in the long form has opened my eyes to just ways of thinking about it. When you get to the long form of the third tradition, it says our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Some people will claim that if you are a hard drinker, you don't belong in AA. Now, I would agree with that. Because how are you supposed to sponsor a real alcoholic if you have the power to just make a decision to not drink? The identification of one drunk talking to another won't be there. And so there's a lot of people that would say, hey, we need to qualify people. If you come to AA, we need to pull you aside and good sponsorship should I ultimately be qualifying. Are you an alcoholic or are you just lost and you found us? But what Bill is ultimately saying is like, we don't have a right to tell people they don't belong. Like an AA group, somebody, if you come into an AA meeting, you say, I think I need to get sober, then you're a member, as far as I'm concerned. Now, when it gets to sponsorship, that is a different conversation. I do not have time to sponsor a moderate drinker. I don't have time to sponsor a hard drinker, but I have time to sponsor alcoholics. My primary purpose is to help alcoholics, not people that found themselves in a treatment center for the fourth time because they are really bad drunk drivers. I drove drunk for 6 years, almost every single day. You know how many DUIs or accidents I had driving drunk? Zero. I can't explain it. I guess I'm just a good drunk driver. Some people, really bad drunk drivers, not alcoholic, but every time they decide to drink and to get behind the wheel of a car, they get pulled over and they've lost their, so they've been court mandated to AA meetings and all sorts of stuff. But they still have the ability to say, I'm just not going to drink anymore. And at some point they can, with enough consequences or enough doctor's notes, they can make the decision to stop drinking. So for sponsorship, for me, that's one of my things. I don't have time to sponsor somebody who doesn't have what I have. If I had zero sponsees, though, I might say, hey, if you're willing to do this, I'll try to help. But I think to me that is more where this one shows up, is in the lens of sponsorship. But how do I help qualify people? When people come to my home group and they're new and they don't know anything, it's part of my job is, well, these days I haven't felt like I need to do this because I feel like the group overall chair should, but we get people that raise their hand and say, I'm an addict. A lot of people are addicts. A lot of people are alcoholic and addicts, but they've qualified that they also have an alcohol problem, but there's people that qualify themselves just as addicts. Sometimes that's just people using a word and not thinking, not having any understanding of history and traditions. They don't know anything. They're brand new. And they just go, I'm an addict. I'm drinking like crazy. I'm doing all these drugs. And, for those conversations, to me, what's important is you pull somebody aside and you find out, hey, I heard you say you're an addict. What does your relationship to alcohol look like? What happens when you take a drink? And try to just find out, I never really drink. I just, smoke a lot of crack. Like, okay. Well, you're welcome in my home group because we have open meetings, meaning anybody can attend. And this is maybe the older interpretation, but I think it should, in my opinion, this is just how AA is. No non-alcoholic should ever share in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not what open versus closed or any of that stuff means. The moment a non-alcoholic shares in an AA meeting, we have become something else. We have become some kind of group therapy that's rallying around a spiritual program rather than Alcoholics Anonymous. And so the singleness of purpose deal, which our fifth tradition and then ultimately this third tradition kind of come into, is like, hey, like our membership is for alcoholics. And one of the things that we've learned is we can't be all things to all people. Because if we start diversifying what we're doing, we might lose the potency of what AA is offering. Because at its core, what Alcoholics Anonymous ultimately is built on is the identification of one alcoholic talking to another. That's AA. We do all this stuff to come together so that we can find each other. But my experience is if you don't relate to me or I don't relate to you, let's say that I don't relate to you. Maybe I'm asking someone to sponsor me. But it turns out after we talk, they don't seem to drink like I drank. This guy's like, yeah, I came to AA and it was really tough out there. And then I quit drinking. It's been great. And I'm like, man, that just doesn't look like I quit drinking a bunch. I always started drinking, dude. Like I came here suicidal, broke with no career, no job, no anything, burned it all to the ground. Except the only reason I wasn't homeless is because I had a family that had said, we can help you out for the first year with your rent when you get to New York City, because I had been selling a bunch of drugs and had taken over paying for my rent when I was the last couple of years of college. So I was selling a bunch of pot for 3 years, and I just was paying my money for my rent that way. So they, the family was like, well, we thought we were going to cover some more college time, so we're trying to help you out in New York. That's the only reason I wasn't homeless, living in the car that they had bought me. I was incapable of living in this world, and I was incapable of not drinking. So if I'm working with a guy like that, and he starts telling me to make this searching and fearless moral inventory, or to go make those amends where I stole a bunch of stuff, and I'm looking at him going, this guy doesn't understand me. Why would I do what he's asking me? Because he doesn't get me. I'm different. and I could have that I'm different thing going on. But if I meet somebody like me and I identify with them wholeheartedly, that's going to be hopefully the thing that's going to make me actually follow through on this program. This guy gets me. So that identification to me is everything. And so I believe, you don't have to just have a problem with alcohol to be here, but let's see if you have alcoholism. And I think as a group, we can do that in a loving way where if somebody is introducing themselves as an addict or a gambler or whatever it might be, or we don't know, that we can pull them aside and have a conversation that's not, loving. We don't cut somebody off in the middle of the meeting. In my opinion, we don't necessarily want to cut someone off cold. I know groups do that. Some groups will chairperson has been told it's our group conscience that if somebody raises their hand as an addict before they start talking, you say, hey, this is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Do you have a desire not to drink and a problem with alcohol? Like there's a group in New York that they do that. If somebody says, I'm Joe, I'm an addict, they'll say, hey, Joe, this is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're welcome. But do you have a problem with alcohol? Or do you have alcoholism? And I know other groups that don't really feel like that's appropriate. They say, we'll let the guy talk and we'll pull him to the side. But I think ultimately it will be pull somebody to the side and have a conversation. But what does your relationship to alcohol look like? Is it possible that maybe there's another fellowship that might suit your needs? And as a group, what you might want to do is have contacts for if there are other fellowships. If there's a Narcotics Anonymous fellowship or a Cocaine Anonymous, with Zoom and virtual stuff, you might be able to get some contacts of people that aren't local, but maybe there's virtual meetings that you could send somebody to. But in that way, it's not like, hey, man, you got to get out of here or shut up. But it's like, hey, we want to get you connected to a fellowship that might really suit what you've got, because it may not be AA. We can't help. I mean, in theory, we can't help drug addicts. We can, because ultimately tons of drug addicts just show up in AA. But I would offer that if we allow that to exist in AA, if you're just a drug addict, you just did a bunch of heroin or opium or, just smoke a bunch of pot or whatever, you never really had a problem with alcohol, then we're kind of stealing members from other fellowships. If we don't say, hey, like, is it possible that there might be a fellowship that you could go in and you could tell your whole story and everybody in the room is going to understand what's going on? So really quick before I'll take two questions here, but the idea is we're not here to kick people out, and AA was meant to be open if you have a desire not to drink. And I will just say that my sponsor Bart, for a while, he'd went and found a dictionary from the 1930s around when this was written, and he found a definition for the word desire. And it wasn't that I just kind of don't want to drink or kind of want something. It was a strong urge to obtain something that is unattainable. That the idea of desire back then might mean more than just like, oh yeah, I don't want to drink again. There's plenty of people that aren't alcoholics that might be like, yeah, I think alcohol's bad, and just not do that for a little while. That's cool, but I don't think you need AA for that, right? If you can make a choice and just stay sober for the rest of your life, or every once in a while drink a glass of champagne at some event, then like you don't need to come and do all the stuff that we do. You don't have alcoholism, you just had a drinking problem. And so to me, that's really the big thing. Do you have alcoholism or you just have a drinking problem? But we're not trying to kick people out. And there's a lady that came to my group years ago, lovely lady. And she would tell her story. And her story was every night she'd go home and drink 2 glasses of wine. And she really didn't want to drink any wine, but she had to drink 2 glasses of wine every night. And in my mind, I'm going, hey, if you could drink 2 glasses of wine and stop, you don't have alcoholism, But to her, she didn't want to drink and she was drinking, and she came to AA. And you know what happened? Some other lady showed up at our group that had that same experience, and she was on her, man, and she helped that lady, right? So it's like, hey, what do I know? You came here, you needed help, you were able to get some help from us. And then when somebody that showed up that had a similar story to you, you went over and you helped that lady. I'm not here to help either of you, apparently. I get the crazy ones. I get the rabid, mangy, full-blown alcoholic, homeless in a car people, That, well, I just got out of prison, man. It's crazy. I get those guys because that's me. And that's great. My favorite. Um, but so, it's like, what do I know? I'm not here to play God. But so we'll go to Quran really quick, and then I'll finish off on this long form, and we'll hopefully look at the relationship stuff too.
Yeah. So I've seen a few members who actually started drinking alcohol during their early stages, but they stopped doing alcohol and they went on to hard drugs. And pretty much their addiction was related to hard drugs. But when we come to how do we address those people? And second is when we come to our fellowship locally, the other fellowships aren't strong. The NA is very weak. Uh, GA has just started. So I've seen people in AA saying, okay, you're an addict, this program will work for addicts, so just come and sit in the meeting. But I've seen people die from it because they cannot relate to us. Right? For me, I personally have both addictions. I did drugs as well and alcohol as well, and I react same way with both of them. So how do we address these cases?
This is like the ultimate question around all this stuff, right? Um, so there's a couple of thoughts. And again, there's just me thoughts, right? One of the things that I know has been super helpful in other parts of the country over here, like in Colorado, some of the people that I've learned a lot from, they got approached by a group of NA people in Denver. And they said, look, you guys seem to have an understanding of how to work a program that allows you to get long-term sobriety. And we don't seem to be able to have that going on over here. Would you show us how you work this program? The same program, 12 steps, right? The 12 steps are the 12 steps. The first step is the only one that is kind of going to talk about the specific thing that you're coming in with. It's like, what horse did you ride in on, right? Did I ride in on a crack pipe and a needle, or did I ride in on a bottle of bourbon and beer, or did I come flying in on credit cards, you know, or food, right? So the first step is really the thing. And then the rest of it is the same. Effectively, we're going to make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God. We're going to take an inventory. There might be slight different variations of some of the ways people do that, but ultimately it should be about the same. We're looking for selfishness. And so one of the things that could be offered is if there are a group, if there is an NA group or there are people, to find out if they're interested in, hey, can we maybe do like a workshop together where we all kind of talk about how we practice this program in hopes that, NA could start maybe working steps how we do if we're getting good results here and staying sober. But the problem with that is you can't really force that on them. So the other consideration is like, if you could qualify for both fellowships, is it possible to look at starting a meeting in another fellowship that's more like working steps and try to get some people there that are willing to make that kind of commitment and get a group of another fellowship that is actually working steps and be able to send people to that group and have contacts from that, or find just like one guy. If there's a guy that's a drug addict that actually is working a program, like get that contact for him. And then if you get somebody that shows up to your group that seems to be more of a drug addict, be like, hey, we got a dude. This guy can help. He can get you connected, but he can also take you through the steps and you might really relate to him. But it's really hard in the early stages of all this stuff because, you don't want to kick anybody to the curb. And that's where it's like the bleeding heart part of it becomes tough. Like, I don't want to say nobody belongs. That sounds hurtful. And I feel like I could help you. My home group has open meetings for a reason. We don't want people to not feel like to not be allowed in attendance, but we just say only alcoholics share. The other piece that you talked about, though, is like some people go, well, I don't have a problem with drinking. It's really the drugs. But it's like, well, so you said cocaine's the problem. Yeah. How often do you just start with cocaine? Well, I usually go to the bar and then I go get cocaine. And it's like, wait a sec. If every time you're going to go and really go on a run, it starts with you taking a drink, that kind of could be an alcohol problem. I mean, call me nuts. But like, if you're not just immediately going to hard drugs, but it starts when you start getting a buzz from alcohol, is it possible that maybe it's important that you don't drink too? You know what I mean? So some of it I think is also helping people to find out their truth. Like, hey, if those drugs weren't available and you'd started drinking, what's gonna happen for you the rest of that night? You ever have experiences where you couldn't go and get drugs that you were looking for, but you already started drinking? How did your relationship to alcohol look that night? You know, and sometimes I think for me it's about probing people a little to see, like, do you have a problem? Because I came in confused. I didn't know what was going on. I came in thinking all I had to do was stop shooting heroin because that started when I was 18 years old and it followed me around the whole time. And then when I started coming to AA, because that was the only game I really was aware of, I found myself drinking every single day. And I found that when I started drinking, I really had no off switch. And I identified that I had physical allergy and a mental obsession towards alcohol. And I really saw that my alcoholism kind of bubble up when but I was confused. And so to me, that's also one of the things here. We don't want to kick people out, but we want to help educate them on here's what alcoholism is. It's a physical allergy when alcohol enters your body. And have you ever had that experience? You know, the Silkworth says it's not all the time. But if you've ever had that day where you went in to have a drink and you found yourself drinking until 6 in the morning, or, you know, going on a run that lasted 3 weeks long with all sorts, like if you've ever had that experience where as soon as I got a little buzz going on and alcohol entered my system, something seemed to turn on within me that was like the Energizer Bunny, it's go time. You might want to take a look at that. You know, if you've ever made a decision to quit and stay sober and then found yourself drinking again, what's going on there? Did you really make a new decision to go get drunk, or do you have an inability to actually leave it alone? Do you identify with the spiritual malady of being selfish and self-centered to the extreme? But I think some of that comes through the lens of we got to sit down with people one-to-one or in a small group and talk to them about their experience, share our experience, and help people try to find out what's their truth. And I think that's ultimately what this is suggesting is we're not here to just kick you out of the group, but we love you and find out. And as a group, you could see, is it possible that we could sponsor an NA group? Could we do a big book study with some NA people and just say, hey, we want to show you how we work this program. If they might have to come to you and ask, though, because I don't know about you, but I'm defiant. Somebody comes to me and says, you do this, I give them the middle finger, even a lot of times. But so Karthik got a hand up.
Yeah. So question one is, I have two questions. So first question is, we have a member who says, you know, I'm just coming here, I'll have a drink every 3 months. So I feel he doesn't have a desire to stop drinking because he wants to drink every 3 months. So would he qualify as an AA member?
I mean, again, it kind of comes down to, am I qualified to decide for you if you have a desire not to drink? But the group could get together and say, hey, man, we're not, like, the group could have a group conscience, and do we allow this person to share? There's one thing that I didn't mention yet, but the third tradition says anybody can claim membership to Alcoholics Anonymous, whether they're alcoholic or not. I have a desire not to drink, I'm a member. No one's going to kick you out. But you don't have a right to disrupt the meeting. And so there's a line there where if you're coming to the meeting and you're hijacking it and kind of blowing the thing up and turning it into something else all the time, you know, the group has a right to stop that. And some groups will ask people to leave for the rest of the meeting, or we'll take somebody out or pull somebody into a side room, or say, hey, you know, why don't you give it a couple weeks and come back? You were really disruptive, you know. But like some examples of disruptions are, you know, there's the Denver Young People's Group. Some guy was there and he was getting a divorce, and the wife, the lady he was divorcing, was also an AA member, and she showed up with a gun and tried to charge down the aisle at her soon-to-be ex-husband, and they had to like tackle this woman and call the police. And they looked at it, they said, if you're welcome to come back next week, just leave the gun at home. You know, so there's all sorts of, you know, things that you could say are disruptive, but part of that too is the group gets to decide, back to the group conscience of if we allow somebody in or not. And for my money, if you're not really hurting, if you're within the decorum of the meeting, we time shares at 3 minutes. If you keep it to 3 minutes and you stop, then you're there and you seem to have a problem with alcohol. But if you're just there kind of looking for group
No,
therapy, it's
but
like maybe we won't let you share in the meeting and we'll talk to you afterwards.
yeah, but he clearly saying that I don't want to quit for good. I want to drink every 3 months. So it's not about him coming and disrupting the meeting. So he just wants to just stay sober for 3 months, drink again, come back, and stay sober for 3 months. So does he have a
I
desire
I
to quit?
I mean, I would just love that guy. It sounds like he's right there in the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that somehow someday I'm going to be able to control and enjoy my drinking. So I'm just here to get the 3 month window, but maybe at some point he's gone for 3 months and he shows back up and he's like, well, I had a drink, but it lasted 3 months. But to me,
Right
I
now,
think
that's
some
not
of that
happening.
is, yeah.
Right now,
Well, and
it's
that
just, yeah.
that might be the thing where then we have a conversation and we say, "Hey, man, you're welcome to come and hang, but we may not call on you in the meeting unless you really feel like you have alcoholism." And I think that's within the group's conscience and the group's right to be able to do that. Only alcoholics are intended to share in an AA meeting, um, and some people will not. We have another hand as well, but do you have a second question?
Yeah, the second question is here in Hyderabad is, they say that since two members form an AA group, but it's clearly written only if they declare themselves as an AA group. But they say that because two members cannot start any financial relationship like business or anything, because um, they just two members cannot start a business because they're AA members. So that sounds stupid to me, but I just want to know how it works there. Yeah.
I mean, to me, an AA group and a business, that's an outside issue. You know, like my career is an outside issue. 10th tradition all the way. We don't have opinion on outside issues. What members do in their personal lives is an outside issue to me. So I guess for my money, it's like I don't have an opinion on any of that. And we've talked about this a little bit. I'm not really sure that over here anybody has any opinion on that kind of a thing. The long form here reads that any two or three alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group. So if you're gathered together for sobriety and that's the only sole purpose of the meeting, you can become an AA group, as long as you're not affiliated. But if you became the AA group for whatever business venture you wanted to start, well, then that's where we'd start to see something get funny. But if two people happen to be like, hey, we're going to start this cleaning business together, or a moving company, or paint houses or whatever, like that would be something they're doing as just members of their community that just happen to both be drunks and have a skill set that lines up. But as long as that stays outside of an AA group, I can't really imagine AA should in quotes should ever have an opinion on it. But that also might be about culture difference. So, I would defer to to me, that's one where it's like, get with your higher power, get with God and see what the intuition is. And if somebody's expressing their own personal opinion, you can be like, that's really cool that's your opinion, man. And I'm going to live my life. But, I want to go to, is it Hitesh? Is that how I say that?
Yeah, Hitesh. I think he's asking you. Can you hear us, Hitesh?
Yeah, thanks, Karthik. Thanks, Devin. It's great to have you around. This is with respect to the example that you mentioned. This is not regarding the traditions. Pardon me for that. Uh, with respect to categorizing a person's addiction as alcoholic, the one you mentioned about the lady having two glass of wine every day, and do we consider her as an alcoholic or not?
Are you saying, would
Hello.
I consider that as an alcoholic?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess how I might think about it is she's not an alcoholic of my type.
Yeah.
But if I look at if I so I've heard it a couple of ways, right? If you look at page 44 in the big book, which is the first
Okay.
page of We Agnostics, it
Mm.
says effectively the qualifications. If when you want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little or no control over the amount you take, you're probably an alcoholic. And there's been debate about the word or. So the debate that I've heard is the first one. They say if you find that you can't quit entirely, if when you want to, you can't quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little or no control. So it's like, well, if you want to quit, but you can't quit, that kind of shows you might have some powerlessness here. You might have this mental obsession piece where you can't stay zero alcohol. Or if when you drink, you find, because there's the other people where I can not drink for 3 months, but then when I drink, I go on a bender that's so horrible, I have no control. So it's kind of starting to look at, do I have to drink every day and what does alcoholism look like? But then I've also had this consideration, which I kind of come to, which is to really be powerless over something. To me, that involves the mind and the body. That if I'm have to drink, but I can make a conscious decision to only drink X amount, then I'm showing that there's a level of power available to me once alcohol's entered my body. It's effectively negating the physical component, which Silkworth says is required. That he goes, an alcoholic is not someone who's just maladjusted to life or making bad choices. An alcoholic is someone that seems to have something going on in their body when they start drinking that is just as abnormal as the thinking that precedes them drinking. And the real problem is if you have the mental obsession where you have to start drinking and you couple that with this physical inability to stop or moderate how much you drink, then that really looks like a hopeless condition that you find yourself in. Now, to me, that is a description of alcoholism that lines up with my personal experience with alcohol. So I kind of come back to what my kind of quote on. I mean, one of the people that really helped me was a guy named Don, and Don once said, "Isn't it wonderful that all these different types of people can come to AA and find the help that they're looking for?" We have all kinds of people that just show up in AA and we love them. And I believe that's what a loving God is doing to us. I've been loved my whole life. As much as I was going out there and causing mayhem, like God seemed to be loving and forgiving me, that I was just breaking God's heart, in effect. And
Okay.
he goes, "Isn't it wonderful that those people can come and get help? But ultimately, what I really need is some real alcoholics in my corner." And so it's like, is it really about me trying to get just alcoholics, or is it like I find my people? And if that lady's showing up, but maybe it's my job. If I see a newcomer lady who shows up who seems to be a really bad drunk, like I hear her share in a meeting and I go, man, that's bad alcoholism. I'm not going to go sponsor that lady, but I might go over there and say, hey, I have some friends. Like I was listening to what you were saying. I have some friends that have had similar experiences. If you want, I would be happy to get you their info, or if they're at the meeting, go make sure that those are the people that are talking to them. And maybe suggest some people that, hey, you might be able to really relate to this person. But I think the real warning sign here is it possible that if I think that I have the right answer and I'm starting to play God and who can be a member of AA, that might be an outsized amount of power that I'm trying to wield. And so for me personally, I don't try to get involved in like you belong, you don't belong. But I do think as a group member, I might have a responsibility to go talk to someone and try to just offer some information and talk to them and find out, hey, do you have alcoholism? Like, do you really think you
Mhm.
need to be here? Do you think therapy could help you? Do you think maybe it's a drug thing? I've got some people that might have that as well, that, whatever it is, just try to help someone find out where they really belong. And then welcome somebody and just say, hey, you're welcome to be here, but you know, you may just want to listen for a little bit and see if you relate to what we're talking about. But I think again, it comes down to every group is different. Every group gets to have their group conscience, and it's ultimately when you guys get together as a group, whatever you decide is it. But a great question. Thank you. I want to just
Thank you,
read.
Devin.
I want to read this one line in here that's like my favorite, and then see if I can cover a few of these questions from Mike's thing. The middle line in the long form, nor ought AA membership depend upon money or conformity. Two things in there are super important. Number one, what obviously we know what money is. And what we're saying is, like if you were to go join, like in New York City, there's all these social clubs. There's the Racket Club or all these like social organizations, like like fancy private clubs, or even a gym. Say I want to go join one of the Equinox is a really expensive gym out here, like $400 and some a month or whatever, and you get access to all the stuff. So if I want to be a member at Equinox or a member at my gym, there's a fee. I got to pay money to get access to the services. And they're saying, hey, in AA, there's no money or no fee. So your membership is not, there's no price tag on that. You come here, you want to be a member, you're a member. You don't have to give us a cent. Now, when we get to the seventh tradition, we'll talk about, as a member, I think it's part of my duty to support my group, part of my duty to support AA as a whole, not just by giving my time, but also financially, because that's what's going to allow us to pay the landlord, have good relations, all that stuff. But as an AA member, just full stop, not with my group, as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's no money for that. You're a member when you say you are. No one can really come in and take that away from you. What is conformity? This is the one that I had to open my mind and open my eyes. Conformity, if I conform to an idea as I adopt it. I conform to some worldview. So, okay, I'm going to conform to what you think is right. What they're saying here is your membership does not include on conforming to what AA is saying, which opens the door to say that guy that might be annoying the living what out of me, who clearly has no clue what the 12-step program of recovery is, who's basically saying, I've been sober 40 years and I've never read a book or done these steps and I just go to a bunch of meetings. That guy doesn't really seem to be conforming with AA's message. But I can't take away his membership, as much as it might drive me nuts. Because we have people in New York, the old timers, and they get listened to because the guy's 35, 40 years sober. And he's telling his message that he's going to the meeting is, you don't have to read a book. You don't have to do any steps. I never believed in God. I've just come to these meetings every day for 40 years. And, the fellowship has kept me sober. And I might say, maybe you're not a real alcoholic because I can't live like that. But again, I can't make that call. But what I think this is saying is like, hey, you don't have to conform to what we believe. And that's ultimately what the story of Ed, the loud atheist, was all about. If you read the chapter, Ed was a really loud atheist who kept saying you don't need this God stuff, and it pissed everybody off. But Ed didn't conform to the fact that this is a spiritual program and that the real answer to alcoholism is we got to find a connection and really, if you want to live long and happy in this world, you're going to need to find God, whatever that means to you. And the way we tend to do that is we work this 12-step program, and it seems to do a great job of allowing me to subtract me. That's what it's kind of like, this is, the 12 steps are Michelangelo and I'm the statue. I'm the stone. And the steps are coming in and chiseling off all the part of the stone that isn't the statue of David. That's what this 12-step program has given me as a way to subtract and let go of and lessen me. And as I've lessened me, I've been able to start having more access to the spirit within. And the spirit starts to come out because to me, that's like, how would you not want to do that? But there's plenty of people in AA that don't want to do any of this stuff. And what this is saying is that's fine. Come on into the tent. Because maybe one day you might be like Bart's wife, Tara. And I talked about that guy, Bart, who sponsored me for a bunch of years. And it's one of my dear friends. And Bart's wife, sober almost 40 years now, probably. And when she was 18 years sober, she had never worked a step and never read a big book, and woke up one day and was going to basically take her own life or go and get completely annihilated, wasted. And at 18 years sober, she called a lady in desperation, and that woman actually took her through the big book and into the 12 steps. And now Tara, at almost 40 years sober, gets all the people in AA, all these ladies that have been sober and never did anything for multiple decades sometimes, and she can reach them. And so what I've had to accept along this journey is that I'm not God, and I don't know why this person might be here and what purpose God has for them being in AA. And maybe their journey is for 10 years, they're going to be that loud, annoying person that says F you to everything that AA is doing. And at 10 years sober, they're going to have a moment where they hit a wall and they realize that the only place they can go is to us because we've been loving them. And they realize that they actually maybe need to live this program or they're going to die. And if we've kicked them to the curb and we've, basically robbed them of our love and our friendship and our kindness and the ability to come to AA, then maybe they don't get to come and be that person that can show up at a meeting and say, I was 10 years dry, dying of alcoholism. I didn't even know it. And when I finally worked this program, my whole life changed. And now they might attract all these other people that were too, after a while, people won't ask for help. I don't know if you've experienced this. If you've been sober in AA for 3 or 5 or 7 years and you've never done 12 steps and you've never helped anybody and you've just gone to a bunch of meetings, there's a lot of people over here that refuse to own that because their pride kicks in. I've been at the meeting. I've done all the service. I was the treasurer. It's like they refuse to let people help them. But so I think part of that is, if we just love people and we understand that we're not God, then maybe there's a purpose that person just doesn't want to, just wants to drink every 3 months. Well, maybe that guy really is an alcoholic and he's just trying to manage his alcoholism. And if we kick that guy to the curb, then where is he going to go when he really realizes he's got a real problem? Because we made it unfriendly. And so to me, that's kind of the underpinning of all this stuff is like, you don't have a right to disrupt our group. And we have the ability to take action on that and say, hey, you're disrupting the group. We're not going to call on you. You have every right to be here if you come and mean business. Because that's the other thing. It says our membership ought to include none who wish, or ought to, how does he write it? Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover. Do you have a wish to recover? If you don't have a wish to recover, I'm not saying you can't be an AA member, right? But that's like another part of it. Maybe you don't have a real desire to get sober now, but I can't make that call. That's between you and your God. But so if you have a wish to be sober, then you can be here. And if you think you have a problem with alcohol, be here. Because I don't know better than God. And I have to just look at, if you're here, maybe there's a reason. Maybe we can help you. But then when I go to the sponsor lens, like the sponsor hat comes on, I don't have a ton of time these days. I was laying in bed last night and I forgot. I looked at my calendar. I'm like, oh, God, you're right. I can't go to the gym tomorrow. I got to go. We got to do the meeting, and it's like, that's where my life's at, is literally every day I have to look at the calendar and go, what am I doing tomorrow? Because there's so much stuff happening that it's like, I can't keep track of it for the first time in my life. There's just too much going on, which is a beautiful thing. But it's like, my job is, I feel like, just to show up and be present and do this thing. And if you're asking for help and I find out that you're just like a dude who's been doing a bunch of drugs, like, I'm going to suggest you find somebody that really relates to that. I'm going to suggest you find a fellowship. I'm going to try to get you some contacts of people. I don't speak in other meetings that I don't qualify. I've been asked to speak in, other fellowship like CMA, Crystal Meth Anonymous. I'm like, I never did crystal meth. I don't need to go speak somewhere because I don't qualify. I'm an AA member. This is where I belong. Now, I guess I could speak in other fellowships because whatever. But to me, it's like, I just don't have a ton of time. So if you ask me for help, I got to qualify that person. I got to find out, do you have what I have? And if you don't really have what I have, I may not have the time to sit and help you. But if I know some other people that kind of look like they don't really have what I have, then I can be like, hey, you should go talk to that guy. This guy might be great for you. And so that's where some of that can be useful. And maybe those people getting together is what God intended. So it's hard because I want I want AA to just be a bunch of drunks like me, but I don't have the authority, to do that. And I think ultimately when I go back to what would God do in these situations, God would just love people. So am I able to love people and allow them the grace to come in and have their own experience and not put a bunch of requirements on what they need to do to belong? And so really quick, I'm going to read this last bit and then I'm going to have to jump. But what Mike wrote was two or more persons when gathered together for mutual benefit may call themselves a relationship. The only basic requirement for a good marriage or relationship is a mutual desire to be in that relationship and a willingness to make it work. So is it possible that ultimately is how this can start looking in my personal life? Like I've got a desire to be in a relationship with my partner and I have a willingness to make that work. And what that's going to start doing is I need to make sure that there's unity and harmony in that relationship. I need to seek a group conscience and make sure that she's heard. Some of the questions he said were, what are the basic requirements for being in a healthy relationship? How could having too many outside interests affect a family situation or a relationship? Why is it beneficial to limit our goals in a relationship? Is it possible that that's what some of this stuff is really about? We have one job here in AA. It's to deal with alcoholism. If we start broadening that scope to everything, maybe we become less effective. Are you committed to having healthy relationships? Do you have a desire to be in your current relationships? Are you working? Do you have a desire to be in your current relationships? How many people does it take to comprise a family group, and what is meant by a family conscience? Are you lazy about working on your part of the relationships, and how important is honesty and trust to a healthy relationship? So the whole thing is Mike would kind of consider it as, what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship with other people? Do I have a desire to be in that relationship, and am I willing to make it work? For me, I have a desire to not drink, and AA said, well, we have these 12 quote unquote suggested steps that are going to change your life. And so if I have a desire not to drink and I wanted to claim AA membership, I found that it was useful and beneficial to start living those 12 steps. And as I started living those 12 steps, I became deeply ingratiated to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous for capturing a guy like me, giving me a home, giving me some new tools, and just letting me find my own way. And so my job maybe is to show up and make sure that AA is still here for the next person, because there's going to be more alcoholics. We will die and there will be generations to come. And I believe that all this is about making sure that as a member, I have the humility to try to serve and make sure that AA lives on when I'm gone. And that if we're lucky, in 100 years, no one will know any of our names. But perhaps we had touched some lives while we were here. And those people's lives that got touched by us will go on and touch other lives. And things that maybe were passed down to us that meant something to us will get passed down to another generation, and no one will know that we said it. And we'll get to live in anonymity for forever, just as a drunk who carried on a simple way of life to try to help another drunk. And to me, that touches me. And that's beautiful. And that's what I started to really get with wanting to really know our history and consider this stuff, was that I want to be here and I want AA to be here. I want your kids or your grandkids or whoever to have an opportunity to recover just like I was given. And it's a small price to pay to try to live with some prayer and meditation, some self-examination, and try to go help some other people every day. That's not work. That's just something that fills my heart with joy, and it then allows me to go out in the world and show up in the world in a way that people tend to invite me back into their lives today. They don't ask me to leave. It's amazing. So my hope is to make it exciting for everybody. I know I'm talking a lot, and I'm glad we're getting questions, but if anything, what I would hope to convey through all of this is the gratitude that I have for Alcoholics Anonymous, and the gratitude that I have for people like you that are willing to come and hang out, in hopes to maybe we can go and carry the spirit out to others. Because there's a lot of us that are hurting. There's a lot of us that are sober that are hurting. And there's a lot of us that don't know that AA exists that are hurting. And I believe it's our job to try to go find those people and to try to love them and put their hand in their creators. Is there any final questions? I'm going to have to start rolling to go get back to my exciting life of playing music for the rest of the day. I'll do better to try to get the audio to you guys sooner. Although this week I'm literally like 9 shows in 6 days, some kind of insane schedule. But I should be able to just sign on really quick and download and send it over. And I'll send over the third tradition stuff as well. But otherwise, let me just double check. I feel like I might have one of these Tuesdays coming up that is funny. No, we're good. We're just signed off on this for whenever. All right. If that's it, maybe we'll just pray ourselves out. Well, let me stop the recording real quick.